we're assuming everyone knows who we are and what we do. Let's just go through really quickly, and I'll pretend like we just came on. I'll say, so here's what we're doing today, and let's everybody just go around the room and introduce themselves real quick. Just give, your little, quick thing about who you are and what you do. That way I can put it back at the top. So that's where it'll open. I'll go. Let me get started. See, this is what I think about Mark and stuff like this, because this is just like the acting part where you get started is nothing. But I have to go. Okay,
he's going to shadow us.
Yeah, exactly.
I got hamsters running around in my head now. What do you say? What do you say?
Exactly. All right. Well, I'm Scott Rouse, and I'm a body language expert and analyst, and I train law enforcement in the military in interrogation and body language. And today we're going to be talking to some of the foremost body language experts and interrogators in the world. And we're going to go through the parts of the Tiger King and give our thoughts on some of the body language things we're seeing. We're not saying somebody's guilty or somebody's innocent, even though that may come, we may say that during this. We're not making a statement as of this is a guilty person or this is an innocent person. We're just talking about what we want to talk about. My role in this is going to be sort of the curator or narrator, or the person who's throwing it around the room to talk and stuff. So my part won't be a big part in talking about what I think about stuff. I'm going to be talking about some things, but not a whole lot, because somebody's got to drive, and maybe next time somebody else will. But so let's go around the room and tell who you are. Greg?
Yeah, I'm Greg Hartley. I was an Army interrogator, so I got started with the whole body language and behavior thing. Today, I'm a body language behavior guy, and I work in the corporate side of things. And to Scott's point, what we're doing here is looking for a baseline and a deviation and trying to see behind the mask for these people what they're thinking. There's no magic. There's no voodoo. This is just us telling you what we see every day when dealing with people, whether they're in criminal situations or corporate America or the media, things that we have learned by watching and by paying attention. And we all come at it from different angles. So that's the best part of this little foursome here.
Mark?
Hi there, I'm Mark Bowden. I'm an expert in human behavior and body language. I've written 4 books on the subject. I speak all over the world on how to stand out, win trust, gain credibility when you're communicating. And I've got that book up there, Truth and Lies, which is really a book on critical thinking disguised as a book on body language. So what I want to contribute to this is not only some kind of understanding around body language, but also an understanding of how you can think just a little bit bigger, a little bit further around human behavior and body language to get closer to what the truth and lies might be.
Chase, you're up.
Everybody, I'm Chase Hughes. I did a 20-year career in the U.S. military, retired as a chief, and now I develop intelligence and behavioral techniques for intelligence agencies, businesses, everyday people, and those center around extreme end of influence and persuasion. And I also teach interrogation and behavior profiling, and I'm a regular trial consultant around the U.S.
Excellent. All right, we're going to take just a real quick look at some video, and then we'll get started.
To Costa Rica.
He said to be sure and get the Costa Rica truck ready because he was leaving early in the morning for Miami. And that was the last thing that he said to me. The last thing he said to me was that he needed me to have Kenny get a truck ready because he was going early, he said, the next day to Costa Rica. And that was the last I saw of him. So I just don't know.
2 things jump off the picture there to me. Number one, you have to go way back to Desmond Morris in the beginning of all this mess we all study for the first no that you learn, right? Pushing your tongue out of your teeth and that being a distasteful subject. They're asking her about something that she's supposed to be telling the truth and she's doing that. That's a red flag for me, first off. But the other one that's more telling is the engagement she has in the 2 different pieces. When she's in soliloquy, she's back and regurgitating data. When she's trying to convince, she's engaged. Pay attention to her throughout all of her videos, even in the crack thing we were talking about earlier.
Okay, great.
Those are 2 that jump off the table to me immediately.
So what are you seeing, Chase?
So I saw, after she said, I never threatened my husband, right at the very beginning, we see something immediately after that called lip compression. Mm-hmm. We squeeze the lips together. And in all of my trainings, I teach very simple principles, and I teach lip compression is almost always withheld opinions. And that's, I just give it that 2-word example. And we'll see some body language experts that might say that's deceptive. I disagree. it may be deceptive when it's mixed with something else. But if I was there in that conversation, I would ask, like, there's something being withheld here. I need to ask more questions. So it doesn't reveal very much, but we are seeing that there's something being withheld for sure from my end. And I think the upright movement of her eyes in both videos, as she's saying, early.
But Chase, if you go back and look at her eye movement, sorry to step on you, but if you go back and look at her eye movement in the cracked thing, she's a right eye access cue for memory, almost exclusively, until you get her into a later video that we'll bring up. But I agree with you. The compression of lips is containment. That's all it is. And I agree with you. You can't say this is a lie because she pushes her tongue out, something distasteful. But the red flags, right? The things to make you want to.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I was doing the interview, that would be the same. And some people would say this repetitive words may be a memorized or some kind of a scripted thing that she had rehearsed. And then some people are saying she shows no sympathy, which she does later, which I'm sure we'll probably get to that video. But in all reality, if you interview somebody 15, 20 years after a death occurred, they're probably not going to show that much sympathy anyway.
Right. Mark, we talked about earlier about, and in interrogation in our world, we have things where we have things we call it when we see somebody who's got a rehearsed answer. They've told the same story for a long time. What are you seeing there that tells you this has been coming from the background you're coming from, and from presentations and from acting as well? What are you seeing in here that tips you off her story may be a story that she's told over and over and over?
Yeah, so let's pick on this early thing, because either that's something that her husband used to say, either he used to say, I'm going early, and she's doing an impersonation of him, or maybe a mockery of him. That's a possibility. But the second time around, I think she talks about Kenny. Kenny doesn't show up in the first version of it. So there's some discrepancy as to, who was meant to be getting the truck together. Is it her or Kenny? So that's kind of interesting. Somehow the script has changed slightly. And then what I noticed in that second later version of it on early is there's, for me, an eye roll. So there's a sense of disdain maybe there now, or contempt. Now, is that disdain and contempt for her husband and the idea of early? Right. He's always wanting to go early. Like, oh, there he is again with his early. That's the thing that'll get him killed. He's always up early flying a plane. Or is it contempt and disdain for her own story that she's created? It's like, man, I'm doing this script again. I should have got a better script together. I have to say this early thing every time now, because that's what I did on the original news interview. Now, I don't know the answer to that, but it brings up interesting questions around what's really going on here. Is it impersonation? Is it a mockery? Is it disdain for the husband? Is it disdain for the story that she may have created? Which one is it? Now, I don't know.
You're squishing around over there, Greg. What do you got?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think all of these are red flags. And if you were in our interrogation world, we would say time for micro interview, time to focus on that. The thing I said earlier, Chase, if we could control the questioning, we would have a much better outcome, because there are a lot of trail offs in this thing. There are many places. The fact she changed her story there in terms of who was there. The other one that's interesting to me that doesn't come up anytime in this video is she called and reported him missing like 48 hours after he disappeared, although he was gone to somewhere to Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. Well, how the hell did somebody miss that?
Right.
Why didn't you go and say, why are you calling and reporting him missing? Isn't he in Costa Rica? That to me is a missing point that no one's digging into in the story, and we don't get the chance to control that conversation.
Not even the local sheriff has discussed that point. No. And I will say something about what Mark said about the story facts changing, where she's kind of adding to it later. In my world of interrogation, in some instances, if I ask you to recall a truthful event multiple times, we will add data to it, and it will be truthful. So, I mean, it's still. I would still obviously ask more questions, but I would absolutely set off a red flag for me that I need to pay attention to this.
Well, and the one thing I would caveat everything we're talking about, we're seeing the video they chose to give us. We don't know what else she said in the video. You can see it's been edited. There are a couple of other later times you'll see her body language shift dramatically in two different denials. And you just want to hear those last few things she said, but they cut it off.
Yeah.
So I'd
Chase,
love to
let's
get
talk-
raw footage.
Chase, let's talk about the propaganda thing you brought up when we were texting back and forth. About what this
I pulled out my old journal where I wrote it down by hand before I developed it. But this was a program we developed for the Psychological Operations Command to change and crystallize public opinion. And Netflix followed this with this series. It's a 6-step program, and they followed it step by step to form a narrative that will make us start to view this woman a certain way. And it's short and sweet. So step 1, create a small window of doubt or uncertainty. That's it. Step 2, develop doubt through targeted questions. So we're making the viewer ask questions throughout the show. If I'm a writer, I'm leaving cliffhangers, which would make somebody ask a question. Number 3, introduce questions that enhance confirmation bias. Step 3. Step 4, display information that confirms the bias on occasion. So that way the person, no matter how much information you expose them to, they'll remember the confirmation bias. Step 5, reward the subject for having come to the conclusion or figured it out. Make them get a little boost of dopamine for feeling really smart and sleuthy. And number 6, expose the subject to a negative event in order to solidify the bias at the end.
Wow.
I think based on that, Chase, we could probably fold up this interview right now.
That doesn't mean she didn't do it just because they biased her.
When I find that,
I think,
When I find that here.
That might be in there. There's another one that's I would highly recommend
as well. You might want to
but I
check
mean,
out
that's a brilliant that's a brilliant walkthrough. Essentially, how you make that entertainment that changes public opinion and engages people. That entertainment. Now, as Greg said, it doesn't mean somebody didn't do something, but we are looking at something which is in the form of entertainment here, which is why we're all good. The world's engaged in this.
Yeah,
right now,
100%.
Because it's great entertainment. Because it throws up those questions that there's doubt, and there's questions, and there's confirmation and bias, and here we all are.
Well, I have a friend who is from South Georgia who said people are amazed by this because they've never lived in South Georgia. They would think it was normal.
Well, I have to say that we started watching this show, and by about episode 2, I was like, I can't watch this anymore because I've been to the States, and this goes on. Like, this is just the circus that happens.
Yeah, we always
like
say
that guy.
In that group, they're more feet than teeth.
Right. Yeah, the moment you're surprised that an ex-magician keeps big cats, it's like, of course they do.
Good Lord.
They're a magician. Of course they have big cats. Of course they do.
So, Greg, to keep us on topic. So, Greg, you talked about, we were texting back and forth earlier when we first got on here, like, here's something's bugging me is the bridging she's using at the end of that second.
Yeah. So Navarro and Schaefer, if you know Joe Navarro and Jack Schaefer, they came up with a thing they called verbal bridging. I call it hiding time, and Chase, you would call it hiding time probably in your world, where they use words like and then after that. So and she uses that several times. Nothing that's a smoking gun, but as I recall, there are a couple of places she says, so that was the last time I saw anything of him. No, she said, and that was the last I saw anything of him after the early. So I don't know what happened.
The last thing he said to me was that he needed me to have Kenny get a truck ready because he was going early, he said, the next day to Costa Rica. And that was the last I saw of him. So I just don't know.
So does that tell us she did something? No, but it shows us an opportunity to hide some information that you might actually go back after. And if we were controlling in an interview or an interrogation, we would actually not allow that to pass. We would go into micro interview and say, let's talk about the and then. Let's talk about the so, and figure out what happened in those few minutes. And who else saw you? And how did that guy who showed up in the next iteration play a role in that discussion. So leaving any stone unturned, right?
A lot of junior or younger interrogators would hear those statements and just it makes sense to our brain to where we don't feel the need to dig into those or even question those.
Yes.
I think it's the same for people watching the show, that it helps our brain just to skip over gaps, and we don't ask questions about those. But absolutely, we call it the bridging the gaps.
And you know, way back when I first left the Army and became a construction manager, I learned the most powerful thing I ever learned about catching those, and it's called backward pass. In construction, you go forward and backward to check your plan. And if you ask people that question backwards, they miss time like crazy. It's a wonderful tool. And anybody can learn to do that in just a few minutes by asking sane questions. Well, you said you left on the Columbo move, right? Yeah. You said you left on Tuesday, but you didn't get there till Thursday. How did that work out? Let's go backward. Right?
Excellent. All right, well, let's watch one more little section right here real quick.
Don lost his pilot's license the day after he got it, so he never flew legitimately again. Every flight he ever did after that, and there were a lot of them, he was flying illegally, so no, he wasn't reporting. He would go down over the Gulf of Mexico, down underneath the level where radar picks you up. If he had any kind of an accident out over the Gulf, we never would have found anything.
She is getting rid of one of the possible outcomes. And by doing that, she's also saying that this will probably never end. So the person who's interviewing me, the person who's hearing me, if you can almost just accept this just a little bit, you'll care less about finding the outcome of the case. And I will say this, as a former navigator of a guided missile destroyer, if you're on the surface of the ocean, there is no altitude that's below radar. That does not exist.
Those missiles work wonderfully well at that surface level, right?
So what I notice about this, and I notice about a lot of the interviews she does, is how she's trying to control this story and control how we accept it. And there seems to me, when she talks about, he's underneath the radar where it picks you up, and there's a nonchalance about it, and her eyes go down. It's like, well, everybody knows that. Well, of course he was under, everybody. So it's just that sense of, look, we all accept that there is this area where you can't get picked up on radar. And what we're meant to do as the audience around that story is go, oh, okay.
Great fiction.
Yeah, and she used the word that area, not the area. She said that area, which implies familiarity.
Right.
Well, it doesn't mean that just because we know that radar works there, that she knew that radar works.
Yeah, I'm sure that's something that, her husband told her to sound like a badass, which all of us do. Right, guys?
Flying at 50 feet. Yeah. None of us do that.
Okay. So that ended up being a big red flag for me. Anybody else got anything on that one? Let's move to the part where she talks about the plane crashes he had.
He had had several plane crashes and had really damaged himself in one of them. And I don't think he was ever completely right after that last crash. I was seeing behavior in him that just didn't make any sense. Like, he could remember things from way back when he was a kid, but he couldn't remember where he was for the last 5 minutes. And one of our volunteers came to me and said that looked like Alzheimer's to him. Maybe he doesn't know who he is. Maybe he doesn't know where to call home. The eccentric's a good word to use.
I got a lot here, but let's let Mark go first. I don't think he has yet.
Yeah, so I want to pick up there on the brush away of the hair on, I don't think he was ever completely right. Okay, so now she's, it seems to me a sense of, I want you to comply with my idea of this story. I want you to comply with the idea that he was damaged after something and I medically can know that he's not right. So what I'm going to do is just do like a little flirt gesture there, just so you'll go, oh, you're pretty. Well, okay, we'll go with your idea then, because now you've got a halo effect around you.
Yeah.
So it feels to me.
I call that, in women, I call that I'm just a girl. They'll do that. It looks so creepy on me, but they'll do it often, to your point. It's a flirtatious move. You see it a lot on news interviews where, especially with like political pundits, and there's a younger woman and they'll push their hair back as they're talking to the seasoned guy. You see it all the time. I'm with you. That's a flirtatious move. And it's the only adapter you really see in this whole conversation when she's moving.
Yeah. All it signals for me is she wants us to join in with her story at this specific moment. It's an important moment for her to go, look, agree with this bit. And my suspicion is that if we agree with that bit, it would mean we'd agree with a lot more of it. So she's kind of worked out what are her key levers, either consciously or unconsciously, about this story.
Chase?
In the beginning, she's describing the number of crashes, and she makes a break in eye contact that's unusual for her baseline. And I'm just referencing the interviews she's done. If you go on her Facebook page, she has tons of her own personal videos. And breaking the eye contact in interviews is not something she does regularly. So she's mentioning the crashes. She makes, I think, a 4.5 second break in eye contact. And then it breaks to her talking about her husband being sick. It's a separate where she's not, it's the second half of that where it's a separate clip. And you can see very real movement in the chin boss, which is also called the grief muscle, which is this chin muscle right here, which is grief or shame, according to Paul Ekman. And so I thought that was real. That looked like real emotion. That the chin boss is very hard to tighten without turning your lips downward. And it was present in that video. And Mark, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for just a minute. If I was telling the truth, I would also want you to believe my narrative.
Sure.
So to your point,
try to sell it.
But to your point, I agreed. But to your point about eye movement, if you notice in every other place, go watch when she's describing her father building these cages and she's accessing and she's remembering it's 4 by, and she's using data.
Yes.
And she's recalling her eyes are drifting right. She uses that as an illustrator as well. She'll make her points by doing this. This is the only time I see her eyes go to her left as she's describing the number of accidents he had and that he was getting dementia. If you go back and look at it, her eyes deviate from that baseline fairly significantly, as well as breaking contact.
I 100% agree. Her baseline has her doing recall of looking up into the corners. And when she broke, I don't know if you want to just maybe play this again in the final video, but when she broke this time, her eyes stayed towards the middle. They were still focused on an object that was off camera.
He had had several plane crashes and had really damaged himself in one of them. And I don't think he was ever completely right after that last crash. I was seeing behavior in him that just didn't make any sense. Like, he could remember things from way back when he was a kid, but he couldn't remember where he was for the last 5 minutes. And one of our volunteers came to me and said that looked like Alzheimer's to him.
Which was uncharacteristic for her. And granted, none of us know there could be a guy standing there with a giant poster of a tiger. And she's
You never know, cat suit.
Yeah.
But I'm going to pick up on that, Chase. Yeah, you're exactly right. Is that people will try and convince you of the truth as much as they're going to convince you of a lie. And I think the grief could very well be real, in that if the dementia is real, then people go into grieving really early on. Now, this could then move forward to that on the point of actual death, the person isn't grieving anymore because they've already done the grieving. That's all done and over with during that dealing with the partner having dementia. So your idea there very well might be a devil's advocate as well for the people who are saying, look, she shows no grief when she's saying, I haven't even managed to have a funeral or anything. There's no grief on her face. Well, if dementia was involved, grief may have been there way earlier.
Very good point. Incredible point that I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that either. Yeah, that's good. The part that bugs me, and Chase, you'll be able to identify with this, I think, as well. When you have a bunch of information, or when you collect some information from someone, or you go to the internet, or you get a new book or a bunch of papers or some research, and you read a whole study and you try to very quickly tell somebody about it, that's what's happening when she's talking about what she's seeing in him as what she thinks is trying to make us think is Alzheimer's. When she says, when everything's broken down to, he remembers what happened when he was a little kid, but he doesn't remember what happened 5 minutes from now. That's one of the classics everyone says when they finish reading about it. And you talk to someone, yeah, I know the basics of it. Here's what Alzheimer's is. I've heard that in real life 2 or 3 times out in the wild, almost specifically what she said. And I think that's what she's done. I don't think somebody came to her and said, here's what I think's happening. How does that sound to you guys? Does that sound logical to you guys?
Sounds like a Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
So to speak.
Yeah, really quickly.
You're right. I think that's a plausible idea that's the internet version of Reader's Digest of the idea, rather than her giving an even more specific story. So the non-Reader's Digest version would be something very, very specific. Like, I remember, talking to him one day, and, he could remember this specific, but couldn't remember this specific. And that was, how do those two things correlate? Yeah, so it's a generalized idea that she's giving across there. So, yeah, I think that's a good point, Scott.
Very good point.
Okay. All right, anybody else want to add to it? All right, let's go to...
No, the one thing I'll tell you, if you notice when she denies any of this stuff, her body language goes to that same... So her eye movement, her accessing cues go to that same place in these later videos when we pay attention, instead of going back to her normal accessing corner. When she's talking about the grinder or the septic tank or any of that, she goes back into that same space, to your point earlier, Chase. She's breaking from contact. Again, clearly she didn't do all of these things. So there's something normal for her in going to that space to get away from whatever the probe is. And you'll see it later.
That became like this wholly exciting thing that I ran him through that grinder. And it's like, I couldn't have run his hands through the grinder, much less a body.
And also in this, if you'll notice, her eyes don't move a whole lot. I mean, is that what you were talking about earlier, Chase, where you don't see a lot of eye movement going hard right or hard left or hard anywhere? They go a little bit to her left, but not a whole lot. Just they're barely going back and forth. Is that what you were talking about?
Right. Yeah. So she, instead of accessing, which would look, if my face isn't clear here, accessing would look more like this, and her eyes were just like this, and kind of. But
you can go to different parts of your brain when you're accessing that, Scott or Chase. And I'll give you an example. My parlor trick. We all have one. This is mine. What's the 5th word of the Star Spangled Banner? Try that. And you guys have read my stuff. There you go. Boom. Now think about the nearest Wendy's to your house and what's across the street from it.
Yeah.
So you're going to use different parts of your brain in different ways.
Absolutely.
We're using our eyes to move. So what I watched her do, and I'm a big fan of, and people will tell you it doesn't work. Scott actually told me the first time I met him, it doesn't work, until we walked in the hall and I showed him on 5 people the same pattern. It's anecdotal, but it does work. And when you then start to pay attention to the fact that a person's accessing all of their visual memories here, so they're moving their eyes here, they're moving their eyes here, they're moving their eyes here, and you ask a question about something they saw and they move their eyes here, something is wrong. I can't tell you that why they're creating or why they've deviated from the baseline, but I can tell you they've deviated. And then all of our tools come to play. So eye movement for me is a big thing to pay attention to. And it's not just that they're accessing, it's what are they accessing? So she could be, to Scott's point, once you know cover stories and you know why they don't work is because they just become repetitious rote memory and you can't sustain that. And accessing cues for rote memory are always to the left. Actors have to learn to get past all that and do all the body language that goes with it. Otherwise, they're just going to stand there and recite something that they've repeated over and over and over to themselves. If she's repeating something she's heard, to Scott's point, and she's doing the internet version, of course she's repeating words. That's all she's doing. So she's looking left instead of remembering behaviors. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So I think that her break in the beginning of the video that we saw just a moment ago was not necessarily accessing, because it was a long period of looking off in the distance and talking away from the interview. But I'm absolutely agree with you on the eye movements. And
she's breaking contact. Yep.
Where they're placed and stuff like that is
every person's different. Agreed. Yeah. That's a baseline issue. You have to figure out an individual person.
Right. All right, let's move on to the meat grinder.
We had a meat grinder. If you've ever seen a Butcher Boy meat grinder, it's about that big around. That became like this wholly exciting thing that I ran him through that grinder, and it's like, I couldn't run his hands through the grinder, much less a body.
Who wants to go first?
Well, let me jump in on this because of all the footage that I've seen, the pieces that have engaged me most is where she laughs. And there's, for me, I think there's 4 places in all the interviews that I've seen, I think from the series, that she produces this laughter on a baseline that in the 37-minute interview that I saw, she only laughed twice. And once was irony and the other was around connection. I think she uses this laughter, and you see it with her eye contact as well, is she produces a laugh and has a look to see, are you joining in? Are you with me there? You're laughing along with me here. She does it here on couldn't run his hand through the grinder, much less his whole body.
I couldn't run his hands through the grinder, much less a body.
She does it on, I picked up the gun, held it on him, and we drove around town as he talked. So you're laughing along as I held a guy at my husband at gunpoint when I first met him.
The guy I was cheating with.
Yeah, exactly. Is that, are we all laughing along at that? I completely zoned out. I don't know where I went.
I had just completely zoned out. I don't know where I went.
When she received some letter, she apparently loses time, and she laughs at that. And then there's no way I can finally say, see, I didn't do it.
There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it.
And she laughs. And again, look, she almost convulses.
There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it.
On that one, and gets the interviewers very strong, targeted eye contact.
I didn't do it. I can't do it.
I would say be socially compliant, join in with me. Do you see how we all see this the same way? When we laugh, it's if you laugh with me, it's because we both get it. We all understand the same linguistics, the same situation. It's saying, you're with me now, aren't you? We're laughing at this together. Well, I look at those pieces and that piece and I go, yeah, I don't get it. I don't see how that's funny. I don't get the funniness of it. I don't get it. So that's, that's notable for me.
I think what she's doing, she's going back to her normal, the way she is, because she knows that's not what happened. She's too relaxed talking about that. If, for example, I were to come in and say, Mark, is this the gun you used when you shot the dog? And you're going to act a lot different. No, if you were relaxed about it, you knew you didn't do it, and you'd been fairly relaxed up to that point, you're not going to show anything that shows stress, because that gun isn't what you used to shoot the dog with if you actually shot the dog. Let's pretend you did.
No, I just go, no, I've never even held a gun, Scott. I don't go, no, I've never even held a gun.
Yeah. So in this case, I think she looks way too relaxed for that to be what actually happened. To me, I mean, she looks, the way she's talking, nothing, she does change a little bit, but she's trying to show how humorous that is, I think. But at the same time,
if I never baselined her, I would call it nervous laughter. But if you baseline her and you go watch the crack thing that we were talking about, Chase, that's who she is. She's kind of a giggly.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's, when she was young, and that was kind of how she made her way, is giggly, push her hair back and flirt and that kind of thing. It just becomes a baseline. And I think, to your point, she's trying to draw people in. Whatever value there is, it's worked for her over and over and over and over. And so you do what you get good at, right?
Greg, I totally agree. Even as an adult, and if you look at her younger photos, she wears these flower rings around her head, which really does symbolize that type of behavior and that type of personality. And with these laughter moments, Mark hit it right on the head with this, what I call a confirmation glance. After something happens, we want to confirm the other person bought it, or they're buying into the emotion that we're giving out.
There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it. I can't do it.
the sheriff in the town did confirm that the meat grinder had left the residence months and months before the disappearance occurred. So I think that we are seeing, again, more eye contact avoidance. There's at least a 25-degree offset from the person doing the interview that she's not addressing. And I think of course, the meat grinder was not used. It was out of the house. But I think there may be some guilty knowledge here as well.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting for me, and you've all done TV, you know that it depends on what camera angle they're using to know some of this as well. To your point earlier, if they're filming here and there, and they're not telling you which camera they're going to use, there's all kinds of opportunity there. But the break with eye contact from the primary interviewer or from the primary camera, surely, I agree. She's denying something. She'll deny the next thing in a different way, like the septic tank. But her body language is always the same. It's that giggly kind of blow it off. And I think, Mark, it's the reason, if I dig into the social reason, of course, yeah, they're creating a contract, but it's what's worked over time right? And we all get good at whatever it is.
I love
Has
that.
anybody ever seen one of those grinders?
No, but it seems like, we all should have seen one.
Yeah.
Like,
They're in Popeye.
you know what I'm talking about.
Well, if we're going to grind you up and you're in too big of pieces, I can arrange that.
Yeah, I mean, is this,
The guy in the Popeye movies, the old Popeye, the guy in Popeye who makes the little burgers and stuff.
Wimpy, yeah.
That's how I imagined it.
Well, even if you can be cut into smaller pieces before you're put in it. So that's not an excuse. That's the reason I laughed when she said, "Really,
how would you know that, Greg?"
Yeah. Well,
I just have an active imagination.
It intrigues me as to just because the exit point is that small doesn't mean the entrance point isn't a big hopper. I don't. But apparently, she says, if you know one of those, we've all seen one of those meat grinders.
Again,
we all know. You can't even get a hand in.
It's called a big boy, everybody.
Yeah, go back to Chase's point. We don't know if it was one of those little hand cranks they were using when they were doing it, or because she said, I don't know if you've ever seen a butcher boy, because it could be something really small.
Butcher boy.
Yeah.
But they on the TV show, they had some giant thing that you could load chunks of an elephant in.
It looked like a wood chipper.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Now let's talk about. Now we're going to get to the part where she talks about her brother being and I'm assuming he's a sheriff's deputy.
I found more details about that today. If you want to hear them.
What do you got?
So I listened to an interview with the current sheriff, and apparently her brother had gone on a robbery call or a burglary call and had a perp in the back seat and could not respond to her and sent a partner, not his patrol partner, but another sheriff. So that's the reason for that confusion in the language. Again, they chose a specific way of talking about it. But I saw that interview. If you watch the Nancy Grace thing, she talks to the current sheriff and he says, yeah, records say, of course, Nancy is on him. So it's interesting.
Okay. All right, cool. So let's check that out.
The day that Don went missing, the investigation indicated Carole had left Wildlife on Easy Street to drive to a nearby store named Albertsons to pick up some milk byproducts for the cats. This is at 3 o'clock in the morning. Her car broke down and Carole ran into her brother, who was accompanied by another deputy. The second deputy gave her a ride back to her home. After that, Carole indicated the last time that she saw her husband was just several hours later, and he was never seen again.
You ready to talk about what they thought happened? Because we got a couple more things to go over. Or does anybody have a thought about what you actually think happened?
The only weird one for me is if you watch the piece about her life, and I don't remember where I saw it, her father was apparently a guy who did a lot of different things in his life. And one of those things was he was a flight instructor. That doesn't come out on the show, but it does come out somewhere else. Well, my immediate thing is, well, if you need to get rid of the body and there are planes at your disposal and your father can fly, that immediately makes me think of, well, maybe that's a handy way to get rid of a body. And the reason, like I was saying earlier, when people spill information up front, to your point, Chase, about trying to disqualify it, well, hell, I would disqualify that one pretty quickly if my father could dump the body for me. So that, for me, is my immediate thing, more than one person involved. Okay, that makes sense. And maybe her brother didn't know anything about it, but she knew that her brother would take care of something if anything happened.
Yeah.
But 3 o'clock in the morning to go out and pick up milk byproducts sounds a little odd. And Scott and I both said, yeah, Clorox is the first thing.
That's the first thing to go for. So what do you guys think? What do you think, Chase?
So I think this goes right into the narrative. I'm manipulating the audience. I'm going to show a single point of view. I'm going to trickle in evidence without saying anything conclusive to where you feel smart for putting it together. And throughout the entire time, I'm going to play a mysterious violin sound.
Carole ran into her brother, who was accompanied by another deputy. The second deputy gave her a ride back to her home. After that,
So so we're suspicious.
Yeah, for sure.
We're playing music that inspires suspicion in people.
Carole indicated the last time that she saw her husband was just several hours later, and he was never seen again.
So we're seeing just another piece of that, and some pieces are left out. So they're giving you pieces to where you say, oh, they didn't figure that out, but I did. So we're thinking, oh, the director hadn't got that figured out, but I pieced everything together. Way back in our head, that's what we think.
Sure.
You know, we watch the news and they say, girl goes missing 6 hours earlier. Her boyfriend and her were seen having an argument outside the apartment. In our head, we're just presented those 2 pieces of information. We're like, oh, I got it.
We're good at filling in gaps. That's what we're designed to do, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting about that is the bigger context here of the world of people who keep tigers. Because what we do is go, what are you doing out at 3 o'clock in the morning for milk byproduct? Like what?
That's normal.
I'm in bed. Like that is abnormal. That's abnormal. They keep tigers. It's like they could be doing anything.
Yes.
Surely anything. The moment you go, I got a whole bunch of tigers in the back. The moment you do that, anything goes. I'm up at 5 o'clock. I'm up at 4:30. We've got a whole bunch of clowns coming around. We got you've opened up a world that we just don't understand. We have no baseline for that. And I think, therefore, to Chase's point, if you're creating entertainment via here's some doubt, here's some, you picked the right world.
It's a great one if you look at all the people who play in this space.
Right.
So true. That's a brilliant statement because anything's possible. Like, what were you doing at 3 a.m.? Well, that's usually when I make vests for hamsters on the internet. But that day, I was getting some milk byproducts. Pretty standard morning. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if you watch the other side of the equation, she's pretty normal when you go over to the guy walking around with a firearm on him and something, I got pissed on by a cat shirts.
Yeah.
Another extreme. And then there's another extreme. And if you go back and read the guys who actually started the thing, I don't think they started with tigers in mind. They were talking about monkey moms or some other kind of odd thing that we would all kind of snicker at, but it's a normal life for someone.
Yeah.
Did you guys catch the part where when that girl got her hand bitten off, Joe Exotic shows up in that paramedic on his back, says emergency or something on the back? Did you guys see that? Or did I dream it?
I didn't see that, but I have to say I did work once with a guy in the UK who had a zoo. Like he's like a version of the UK version at the time, and he was working in politics at the time. Anyway, one of his keepers died, got eaten by a tiger, and he was like, yeah, well, obviously, because it's a tiger. So it was a lion. I can't remember if it was a lion or a tiger. But he was like, well, obviously, the keeper was careless, and that's going to happen because that's the apex predator. So obviously. So this is the world we're working in. A world where these people who keep big cats just go, yeah, well, obviously they got their hand eaten off, obviously.
Well, and if any one of us were really to tell real stories from somewhere in your past life, those are abnormal stories too, because we come from a different world, which is why we're analyzing people. So I think whatever little niche you get into and whichever little Maslow corner you wedge yourself into, things become normal, right? It's the best and the worst of humans. If you do it enough, it just becomes normal, right? That's a great observation, Mark.
Another thing about, we're talking about things that are normal and things that are abnormal. When she's talking about when she got the death certificate. Let's take a look at that, because when she talks about the death certificate, she sounds like she's a schizophrenic or something. She sounds, what happens to her? It sounds like she's got it sounds like she's got a brain tumor or something's wrong, because she got abducted by an alien, as to Mark's part, because she's got missing time there.
Yeah.
That's that's where you go in and go, here we go, there it is. All right, let's, you start right. There's a lot in there. So that shows about what's going on up here, in other words. So let's take a look at that.
And was there ever a formal memorial or funeral or anything?
No.
So no one...
I remember the day his death certificate came. I opened the letter, and I remember looking out the window, and then the next time I remembered anything, it was pitch black outside. It was just like I had just completely zoned out. I don't know where I went, but that was the closest thing that I had to a memorial.
I've got a lot for that one.
I was going to say, Chase, can you kick off on this? Because undoubtedly you probably wrote some program that causes people to miss out time.
Yes, I actually did. I've worked on that a lot. So missing time in psychology is referred to as dissociative amnesia. And that's probably the episode that happened there. Could be from a mental problem. But one thing we noticed there, that the moment that she finishes saying death certificate, there is a tiny fluctuation in the upward chin boss movement.
I remember the day his death certificate came.
That's hard to see. And we may need to do a replay in the final video, but we'll see a little bit of grief there.
I remember the day his death certificate came. I opened.
So this was either grief, or this is what we call manufacturing an alibi. Like something happened during those hours, and I'm going to preemptively say that I have complete amnesia for the entire event.
There's also an interesting, when she says death, this is the only time I see this body language, and I'm far from a micro gesture guy. I always say somebody smarter than me does that. But she bares her tooth. I mean, her lip is uncharacteristically raised so that it exposes her teeth on the right side if you watch it. It's the only time I see her do it in all the video I've noticed, and it's just so pronounced. It was almost like a smirk. Yes, right. Exactly. Almost like a smirk, like a half-sided smirk, a contempt kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So Mark, that should go right to sorry, Scott, you go earlier. No, I was talking about you when you talked about the facial expressions of when you were talking about facial expressions, probably of contempt earlier. This goes back to that.
Yeah, the earlier one was the eye roll, which is sometimes associated with disdain or contempt. One being more social than the other. Disdain being more social and to do with a group that you belong to more than the individual. But yeah, that sneer there, that showing of the incisor, essentially, to go, I could rip some flesh with that is interesting. I want to pick up on Chase's point about the propaganda of this. It's interesting for me, thinking about what you've been saying there, Chase, that in this moment here, they choose the bird sound, to leave the bird sounds in behind that. They've got that music.
Or funeral or anything.
No.
So no one...
And then they cut to just having the bird sounds as she talks about losing time.
I remember the day his death certificate came. I opened the letter, and I remember looking out the window, and then the next time I remembered anything, it was pitch black outside. It was just like I had just completely zoned out. I don't know where I went, but that was the closest thing that I had to a memorial.
Which is very reminiscent of that kind of Hanna-Barbera cartoon, like I just got clonked on the head, and the birds tweeting around your head. It's a classic kind of trope or meme for the idea of I've lost time. I'm in a different world. You know, my brain is altered right now. The other thing I'd like to ask all of you about is what do you see about what I would call that kind of convulsion that happens around, there's no way I can finally say, see, I didn't do it.
There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it. There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it.
Which there's some, you know, double negative in there as well. But for me, there's an out breath as she's trying to, there's some weird breathing, there's some odd breathing pattern to try and speak. She convulses right forward. And I take what everybody said about her personality, and there is something gregarious and big about her, but that seems not well controlled to me.
I agree. I think that's what most psychologists would call a cathartic exhalation.
See, I didn't do it.
As she's just kind of getting rid of that emotion and spitting it out, because she's been wanting to say that so much. And she's getting to say the sentence, but it's couched in another one. And I think that's also the reason that it became a double negative. And towards the end, we see the eye batting as she's wrapping up her statement and looking back at the person doing the interview. You see a couple of batting the eyes. And in her physical standing interviews, you can see her doing something similar towards the end of her making a point, where she does a foot tilt that some called the sassy sailor. If you guys remember this from Barbara and Alan Pease's book, where a woman's foot will tilt outward to indicate curiosity or innocence or availability sometimes, depending on the context. But you see that and the eye batting behavior towards the end of lots of her statements.
Interesting what you talk about with the exhalation, the cathartic exhalation. Often when I know someone has prepared a statement or they've prepared something they want to get out, they will rush to get it into the right place so that they can get it said, or they may rush because they're afraid they don't get the opportunity. And I always say cadence is a great indicator, because if a person rushes either in or out, there's something that they have been working on for a while, to your point. So,
Did you notice how quickly she changed from that bubbly thing to the being depressed or bummed out? Really, I mean, it happened quick, man, from one right to the other. You can see definitely that, and there's not much time in between the two. There's that where she's all big and bubbly, then there's a time that where she's down really quickly.
There's no way that I can finally say, see, I didn't do it. I can't do it. Didn't do it. I can't do it. Didn't do it. I can't do it.
She may have some of this, you know. That would explain shopping at 3 a.m. for milk products, you know.
Milk byproducts.
Yeah, there you go. Byproducts.
The details.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with you maybe there, Scott, on it's such a big change there that I haven't seen that extreme kind of turn on a dime in some of the other interviews, but maybe I've missed those. That, you know, I'm intrigued by that moment. I don't have any answers about it, but I'm you know, we've got a huge amount of data from everybody here and ideas around it, but I still don't have any answers about what on earth is happening at that moment. I think it's just quite extreme.
One of the things that we've danced around is if you see her in a normal conversation, her hands are going, she's talking, she's illustrating. Not much in most of these conversations when she's being asked very pointed questions. I don't see as much illustrating with her hands. She's still using the eye thing that she does so well, but not as much hand movement. But watch video of her walking with those people. She's touching them, using regulators. She's controlling conversation. She's illustrating. When you watch the cracked thing where she's talking about building cages and moving her hands, I don't see much of that when you're asking these pointed questions. It's just, that for me is a red flag. I would want to dig in on why she isn't illustrating when I'm asking questions, and why she may be emphatic at other times when I'm with illustrators.
Really
another red flag to think about is when you have a dog or when you have a pet fish, you do something to say when that thing dies, when your pet fish dies, before you flush it, you go, hey man, you know, Captain Nautilus, you were an awesome goldfish, or, you know, Pepper or Fluffy or, you know, Patches, you were a great dog or a great cat. And you have that you have a little something for him. And in this case, she has nothing for a guy she was married to and supposed to have loved and been in love with, and she doesn't do anything.
Unless she's holding on to hope. And that's the reason, because he's still missing, or, but I definitely think that there should have been something. Even I go and light a candle every once in a while, or I keep a place set at the table, or I keep the porch light on, something that she adopted, a new ritual or a new way of doing things because of the absence of a person in her life, which goes back to the whole question about his last will and testament, which we may get to here in a little bit as well.
Okay, Greg, you want to start with that?
No, with the last will and testament, I love that one. In the event of my death or disappearance, of course, or dismemberment or ground up by an accidental meat grinder accident. But she does cover that in her own, when she goes back and says, "Here's my retort to this." She says, because he was in Costa Rica and there were lots of drug guys and that kind of thing, there's a potential that he could disappear. Is that rational? I would say if you're going into northern Mexico right now, you might actually put that in. But is it normal? Probably not. And probably most people would say my death, and then you would go through a process to declare you legally dead. It still goes all the way back to, why did you call missing person when you flew to Costa Rica in your mind?
Yeah.
That's where it starts to get weird for me.
And then then we get to the point of asking whether or not the behavior of a tiger person is normal.
Right.
To begin with.
That's true. All right, let's see what else we got.
There's probably all kinds of erratic things that we haven't seen. To your point earlier, I think, Chase, about that gap in time. God knows what she did when that came in. She may have had a party. She may have had, who knows? And she could be hiding all kinds of things with that simple verbal bridge of and then, right? She's hiding time. So what was normal for her? Maybe she did grieve. Maybe she covered that up. We don't know any of that. We only know what we can see.
Anybody got anything else we should cover or talk about?
I saw a quick body language guy, and I wanted to get everybody's opinion on this. This is I think he was a British body language expert. I forgot his name. And he is saying the tight lips when she says, "I never threatened him," and then squeezes her lips together. He said, that's 100% deception. I'm going to need to know more about this. And I'm watching, I'm just kind of like going, oh man. And then he's saying she's talking about her dead husband. She's not showing any emotion. And I'm saying 20 years.
Right. 20 years.
My grandmother died 3 years ago.
Yep.
And I can talk about it right now. I haven't shown any kind of emotional response to it, because I've grieved, I've gone through it, I've talked about it, and she's done it 1,000 times more in interviews, on camera, to all kinds of different people. So I would say to discount that fact is silly, but that would be my opinion. I want to get.
I've been through much harder loss than that, and it's only been 5 years, and I can talk about it now without showing emotion. But it's not because I don't truly miss the person. It's because I've adapted and I have the ability to talk about it.
Well, to that point, I've trained a number of people to deliver the eulogy at their closest relatives, and part of it is they want to be able to get through it and they don't want to break down, and so what we do is to go through it and through it and through it, and in front of me they deliver the emotions to me. So I witness those emotions, and we do it many, many times until they've exercised those. And when they now go into that speech pattern, which is it's a set speech, they now don't need to deliver that emotion. So yeah, you can cause yourself even very close to the death to not emit the emotions in a certain situation. Now, does that mean they don't feel it anymore? No, of course not. Yeah, they feel it, but they don't need to exercise it in that particular way at that particular moment.
Humans are adaptable. Yeah, that's what we do.
Absolutely. So I totally agree with that, Chase.
So if we were to go back, Chase, and as you know how this is done, we'll talk about it so everybody else will get an idea how it's done. we could talk about your grandmother when you're little and all the things she did with you and all the fun you had with her. And we go back and relive some of those things and situations around that. And that would be able to drudge up those emotions and have them come back up in a small.
They were coming up just you saying that right now.
Yeah.
So that does work.
Yeah.
So
but I would say that lip grip or the pursed lips or whatever you want to call it, where they did to say that you're being deceptive, every one of the guys who gets busted for an affair, I mean, there's a famous meme going around where there's a dog doing that. It says, I think my dog has been in a sex scandal. Every one of these guys who's busted in a sex scandal does that after the fact. They're all going, and that's not lying. They're hiding. Anthony Weiner, Rush Limbaugh, you name it, the whole list. I have the meme somewhere. Scott, you probably have it and can pop it up because I was using it in my presentation. There's a dog doing the same thing.
I think you sent me that, or I sent you that. One of us sent it to the other one.
Well, I don't remember where it came from, but I use it in my presentations now just to say it means controlling emotion.
I've done that when I know I'm not lying because my brain goes, oh, you know what? You're telling the truth. You better not do that afterwards. And I'm like, I just did it. I just thought about not doing it because I know I shouldn't.
Well, we have the worst of it because all of us know and we're all going, damn it. I did that after all that preparation.
And we're assuming everybody can see what we see.
That's right.
We're like, oh shit, I just touched my face on this Zoom call.
Right.
Yeah, you got to be cool, man. Yeah, that's the thing.
On calls like this, I just give up. I'm just going to do whatever I'm going to do.
Well, with us, I'm just saying, hey, if you see something that I don't see, let me know.
My favorite thing is when somebody says, can you turn it off when you go to, when they're talking to you. So
I would say, of course.
Your hands. Oh, hell yeah, you say, of course. Everyone, all of us do, But you're sitting there going, oh, my God. And that's when you get into,
I totally have the ability to switch off my unconscious mind.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Or I just say that.
I say that all the time.
Yeah. And they say, well, can you tell? I said, nah, it doesn't work that way. We're just talking. It's like, hey, you got to be kidding me.
Anyway. You know what? I teach body language, and as everybody here does. And I'll teach something about blink rate going up or lip compression or facial touching. And then during a break, somebody will come up, and inevitably somebody will come up and be like, hey, I noticed your blink rate actually went up when you were talking.
Yeah.
Like they got me or something.
Yeah.
Right. I'm like,
I love that.
I'm a human.
Right.
I'm a human too.
And I always say I feel like I'm Jane Goodall among the chimps, except for I'm also a chimp. That's the problem.
That's great.
You're the chimp that thinks you're Jane Goodall. That's the thing.
But you
even better way to put it, Mark. I'll steal that line next time.
Yeah.
Do you remember when you first, everybody will experience this, when you first got into this, how that's all you did? When you realized, when you heard one thing, this means this, and you when you think you were absolutes about being, if this happens, it means they're lying. If this happens, it means they're telling the truth.
Yeah,
you go
the
back
nose scratch.
Yeah, you used to collect those, and that's all you look for that. Like when you first get into psychopathy, and everybody you meet. I hand to God, from the time I was 23 to about 26, everybody I met was a psychopath. I remember thinking about people.
Well, you were in that business. So.
That's true too. So it's everybody. I remember thinking about people when I was a little kid, thinking that cat must have been a psychopath. That guy was a psychopath, man. He must have been because the way he was. It was like no, but when you start getting used to seeing stuff in body language, and you're not calling, like you were saying, Chase. People will think they don't know what you're doing. If they see your eye blink rate go way up, and you're like, yeah. I don't know what to tell you about any of that. They'll see your arms go up and down and all that. There's a video in that course Greg and I did, and as we're talking, I can't. These glasses, I have to be able to see clearly. I have to do like this, and so as I'm talking to the guy I'm supposed to be talking to, my head is back like this as I'm giving some big bunch of information. And when I see me, I think, man, I look just like I look just like I'm lying my hind end off. Or not being honest, or because I'm doing this number because
you're looking down your nose.
Yeah, to do this to be able to see everything clearly because my nose is so.
For me, the weird part is the way I learned this is not through a book or that. I finally had to go get books to try to figure it out. But Chase, you would appreciate I was a seer guy for 4 years, and we wrote the story these guys are supposed to hide, and they're trying to tell us lies all the time. And if you can't pick up body language from Americans trying to lie to you 8 hours a day, 4 days a week, you're pretty slow. So I started saying, what does this mean? And what does that mean? And started digging for it. And you would see, you automatically want to think people who touch your nose are lying and all that. And then you realize, no, it's not that. It's something else. They're different when they're lying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And it's sad that training doesn't exist in the military.
No, it doesn't. I became a reserve full-time trainer in my last 7 years of the Army. I was an AGR guy up at Fort Dix, and I did it for the Army there. I taught behavior and body language stuff just from digging and learning. And I was the only guy doing it. You're right.
When I go talking to military guys, and I'm on those things that can't. We've talked about who it is. I went and worked with the last time.
Yeah.
Those cats didn't have any earthly idea, body language wise, what to look for. They thought the same things people on the street think.
Yeah.
And when I see that, I'm like, good Lord, man, these guys of everyone should be able to say, here's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, they're interested in very specific things. They're interested in muscle twitch and preparatory moves and all that kind of thing that guys you're talking about.
So I think what happens is these absolutes that you get in, some books and certainly on the internet for sure, just give people a lot of comfort.
Yeah.
And so, when you're talking about the military guys, they want some absolutes that are maybe easy for them to detect. Yes. They're in the right kind of radar range for them to go, wow, I saw that and this means this. So now I can be comfortable that, X is happening. And of course we know that it's that or something else.
Right.
And really our world is one of critical thinking, of thinking just that little bit further and constantly going, well, what else? Or what if that's not true? Or what if what if the idea is in my head but not in their head? How much am I part of this behavior that's going on right now? How am I responsible for it? So that bigger critical thinking piece, which of course takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to do critical thinking, and most people just want an answer. An answer today, now.
Well, especially as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, in the military, where average people are packaged information and handed that information until you get to certain skill levels. That's what everybody wants. I mean, what does this mean? What does that mean? It makes it easier for people as well.
Yeah. And at the same time, I think it makes it, in some cases, dangerous, because when you talk to someone about, let's say if you're dealing with guys in the military and they're at an outpost and someone's walking up to them, if you're in Afghanistan, let's say, or somewhere, and they're walking up to you and they look nervous. What kind of nervousness are you seeing? What tells you, are you seeing nervousness because that person's nervous because they're walking up to touch you and run off? Like the little game they play, are they walking up to actually talk to you and they want to touch you and be part of it because you're an American and they like Americans? Or are you seeing that dead-eyed nervousness where they've got, 2 pounds of C4 strapped to their stomach and they're going to take as many people out as they can when they get close? So
and all of us who interrogated, when people say he looked nervous, well, hell yeah, he's nervous. He's being interrogated.
Right. That's what I'm constantly saying to people is, look, if if you're in an interrogation situation, there's something up. Like there's something wrong from moment one that you ended up there in the first place, like, in certain situations. So you are obviously a person of interest. Well, that's enough. That's enough that you're a person of interest. You've clearly hung around with the wrong people, or you were there at the wrong time. And so, I'd be stressed because I've spent most of my life trying to not be in that situation. So if I end up there, I'm like, what the hell happened here? Something is up. This is wrong. I've spent my whole life trying not to be sitting here being interrogated. What, how did that happen?
But the thing is, you use that in interrogation to your advantage.
That's
because when you ask people, there are certain, in the things you go through, the little pattern of things you go through asking questions, you want to see that at certain times. And when they've forgotten they felt like that, and you've got them so relaxed and you're talking to them, and all of a sudden you ask them a question, and they get right back to that, and they keep picking up really quickly. That tells you a lot. We won't go into the details of it, but that's that's actually good that you feel that way.
I was teaching a human resources guy who's a professional interviewer for a Fortune 500 company. And he said, I need to be able to tell when to spot stress behavior. And I was like, bro, you do job interviews for a living. I need to teach you how to spot comfort. I need to teach you how to spot when somebody's comfortable, because that's going to be the outlier.
Yeah, that's fact. Yeah. And I work in corporate America where people are trying to get through that hurdle all the time to get to a position. And the higher up you go, the more stressed they are because the harder it is to find positions.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're a clerk working in a big corporation, that's easy to find a job. But when you get to be the CFO, that's a different story. And they have a lot at stake and those kinds of things. And,
right. And then you think about being the interviewer, where you've got the whole of the board going, will you go and get us somebody to do this job? Come on, do your job, find somebody to get this job. You've got an interviewer under stress who has then got an interviewee under stress. The whole thing is now framed with stress.
And I often say what we do as interrogators is give permission to people to do something really stupid. And that's tell us the truth, right? And that's what we all have in common. We give people permission, whether it's solicitation or interrogation or whatever we're doing, we're saying, hey, it's okay. You can be an idiot. Just tell me this. And for some reason, they feel like it's okay to tell us. That means we're doing our job correctly.
That's the key theme of my entire interrogation course, is that you're in the business of permission.
Yep.
Persuasion, permission.
Yep. I always said it, you sell treason when you do what I did for a living, you know? You're telling the guy, oh, no matter what they told you, that's okay. They're not here.
Mm-hmm.
People fall for it.
Selling treason.
Okay. All right. How's that? Everybody
Okay,
good?
good. Thank you. This is a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was good fun, everybody. Thanks for that. Yeah, for sure.
Seriously, we should. We should do this. Find something else to talk about and do it again. It's like we're doing this once an hour and a half. We've been doing it. So, but if everybody would please go ahead and delete that video I sent just in case.
That was the biggest amount of work you did for the whole video.
I did that 4 times because I kept laughing. So it was bad because I had another one on there that was just, that was bad. It was bad. So that's what it was. But go take a look at it. You'll see I did a lot of good ear work on that. A lot of that. All right. Well, let's get out of here. And I'll get this together.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure.
Guys, good to see you.
Thanks so
Stay
much.
well, everybody.
Good to meet you, Greg. See you, man.
See you.
Bye now.
Get in touch.